Patrick and I have managed these meetings always, and sometimes we want to give you something to do. So we have Gerry Condon and Helen Jaccard here who are going to share with us the dangerous reality of nuclear exchange and the actions we can take to derail this nuclear nightmare. Gerry is the coordinator, facilitator, driving force behind the Nuclear Abolition Working Group. Gerry has been past president of Veterans for Peace and a board member. Helen is the coordinator, facilitator, and driving force behind the Golden Rule sailboat, which just completed the Great Loop and is back in the Northwest. And so, with that, Gerry and Helen, take it away.
Thank you, Jim and
Thank
Patrick
you.
and Southeastern Veterans for Peace Regional for inviting us. And thanks to everybody for showing up. We're humbled by a large turnout, which apparently is unfortunately capped at 100. Seems like a few more people might be trying to get in. So this is a presentation we haven't done before, and one we're probably going to be doing a lot of variations of in the future. And it's basically based on the imminent threat of nuclear war and how that is tied to the various wars that the U.S. is involved in. The premise is a very simple one, that in order to avert the very real danger of nuclear war, it's important that we press very hard to end the wars that the U.S. is involved in, specifically the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, the U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza, and the war plans and preparations for war against China and North Korea, among others. Those are kind of the most outstanding threats that we're facing right now. And you will note that the US and Russia and Israel and China and North Korea are all nuclear armed nations. Now, my amazing partner, Helen Jaccard, has put together some graphics here to make what was otherwise a very gray presentation to be a colorful one. And we're going to get started here, and Helen's going to help me explain some of these graphics, as well as she'll be making a short update on the progress of the Golden Rule's voyage to the Pacific Northwest. We intend to keep our joint presentation under 30 minutes because we want to have as much discussion as possible. And, you know, we're very actively involved in the nuclear movement for nuclear abolition. But, you know, we're relative newcomers. We haven't been doing this for decades. And anti-war work, yes. Anti-nuclear work, not so much. So we don't consider ourselves to be deep experts in any of these areas. We have some people on this call that can bring their expertise once we get a discussion going. So we want to move to that as soon as possible. I just had an article published conveniently and serendipitously. My article, "Nuclear War is Imminent Unless the U.S. Embraces Peace and Soon," was published yesterday in antiwar.com, which has a lot of great information and a variety of articles and occasionally publishes my articles as well. And I start out by saying, and you can read it here on the screen, the world is headed toward nuclear war. And I really believe that is sadly true. The horrific nightmare of global destruction that has haunted humanity ever since Hiroshima and Nagasaki is nearly upon us. For decades, peace activists and nuclear experts have warned about the growing danger of nuclear war. And the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has moved the hands of their doomsday clock all the way to 90 seconds. How much closer can we get? These dire warnings being dismissed like the man with the sign shouting the end is near? Because doesn't seem like too many people are taking this very imminent threat seriously. Next slide, Helen.
I'd like to make a small remark, and that is that the picture on the left, the atomic bomb picture, that was the Trinity test, and today is the anniversary of the very first atomic bomb.
Okay, thank you, Helen.
Mhm.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the original nuclear powers, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, who were the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, they never followed up on their commitment when they signed and ratified the 1970 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It required them to begin good faith negotiations for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Instead, they have poured billions of dollars into modernizing nuclear weapons. And in the meantime, 4 more countries have joined the nuclear club: India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. Helen, would you like to say a little bit about the graphics there?
Well, one thing that I noticed when I was putting this together is all these borders that are shared between other nuclear armed nations. So Pakistan and India, we knew were having conflicts over Kashmir, but I didn't really realize how close China, Russia, Pakistan, India, and North Korea all are in one place. And also on the second graphic, it's not just the United States now putting 6 nations at risk by putting our nuclear weapons there: Italy, Turkey, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, but also now there are nuclear weapons in Belarus.
Okay. Right, because Russia recently deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus next to Ukraine. And the US actually has nuclear weapons stored on bases in 5 European countries: Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Turkey. Okay, after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact military alliance of the Soviet Union, there was an opportunity for a broad peace in Europe, but it was squandered, unfortunately. NATO, which was an anti-Soviet military alliance and still is, led by the US, should have disbanded at that point. Instead, it pursued an aggressive policy against a weakened Russia, surrounding it with hostile military forces, including nuclear weapons. And Helen, you want to explain those 2 graphics there?
Yes, well, what you can see here by what's in blue, that is first the original NATO members, and then on the next picture, the current NATO members, you just see that there's a huge change in number of countries that border Russia that are members of NATO. And so it looks to me like NATO has pretty much taken over all of Europe, not just, what they were doing before. So, and that's the problem right now in Ukraine. So you can see how Ukraine belonging to NATO could definitely be a problem for Russia.
Okay, so in 2002, President Bush, and I'm reading from my article here in antiwar.com yesterday. Okay. I also have it up on my phone. President George W. Bush unilaterally removed the U.S. from the anti-ballistic ABM missile treaty, while placing a U.S. missile base in Romania. And then in 2019, President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the U.S. from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty that had lowered nuclear tensions in Europe, while placing yet another U.S. missile base in Poland. So what are the Russians supposed to think? the U.S. was clearly seeking a dominant nuclear warfighting position. And given the declining, let me see, now the neoconservative warhawks or neocons have captured the foreign policy machinery of both Democratic and Republican administrations. Given the declining economic power of the U.S. vis-a-vis a rising China, the neocons believe that the U.S. must aggressively employ its military superiority to maintain global dominance. So the U.S. maintains 850 foreign military bases in over 80 countries, compared to a handful each for Russia and China. And Helen, that graphic kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Oh, and there's another one that's pretty chilling. Those are the U.S. military bases around the world, and not all of them, and not including the ones in the U.S. Those are significant military bases. So we're everywhere, including surrounding China, including surrounding Russia. And then there's a 469 documented military interventions since when? Probably since World War II. Western politicians and pundits frequently accuse Russian President Vladimir Putin of making nuclear threats to use nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine. Indeed, Putin keeps reminding the world of Russia's nuclear rules of engagement. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons if it is attacked by the superior conventional forces of NATO. The U.S. actually has a very similar nuclear posture. It will use nuclear weapons first, even against non-nuclear threats, such as a cyber attack even. As Daniel Ellsberg reminded us, even to possess nuclear weapons is to use them every day, like a gun pointed at somebody's head. And this is a graphic here of some of the arms control treaties that were signed and then expired. I think the only remaining significant arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia is the New START Treaty, which I think has been extended through 2026. And the Russians have been reluctant to engage in negotiations to extend it at the same time that they are under attack, as they feel, from the U.S. and NATO. Apparently oblivious to the imminent threat of nuclear war, President Biden continues to pour billions of dollars of weapons into its proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, while blocking peace negotiations. The Biden administration is simultaneously sending billions of dollars in weapons to Israel as it commits a horrific and ongoing genocide in Gaza. Israel threatens other Middle Eastern countries with its U.S.-backed military, including nuclear weapons. Can anybody now doubt that Israel would use them? The neocons are also actively preparing for a war against China, conducting provocative freedom of navigation operations in the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, and building anti-China military alliances throughout the Pacific. One of the few foreign policy debates in Congress right now is which war should take precedence, the war against Russia or the war against China. Both are nuclear powers, of course. Then there's the joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises aimed at the decapitation of the government of North Korea, another nuclear power. What could possibly go wrong? The threat of nuclear war does not exist in a vacuum. It is directly related to aggressive military competition.
Hold on a second, Gerry.
Yes.
I wanted to make a comment about this preparing for war with China, because I remember when the U.S. people stopped a war with Syria And then eventually the propaganda machine turned on, and eventually the people just ignored the fact that the United States was at war with Syria. But I also now see that this same propaganda machine has been used now at least 3 times against China. First, we were claiming, oh, China is building all these island bases in the South China Sea. And for some reason, the people didn't support war with China then. Now it's, wow, China's doing great economically, and so has a lot of influence around the globe. But that still didn't seem to get enough enthusiasm among the American people to start a war with China. Finally, right now, they're working on, let's start a war with China regarding the independence of Taiwan. And they know that this could start a war because we've had a one China policy from the beginning, claiming that Taiwan is part of China, as does China. So it looks to me like even if they don't manage to start a war over Taiwan, they're just going to keep trying until they manage to get a war started with China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Yeah, as I was saying, the threat of nuclear war does not exist in a vacuum. And I make that point because there's kind of a silo that the anti-nuclear movement has been traditionally involved in. And the anti-nuclear movement often does not really talk about current U.S. foreign policy and wars and interventions. And likewise, the anti-war movement, as such, the anti-intervention movement, the anti-imperialist movement, seems to ignore, to a large extent, the threat of nuclear war. So I think that's a dynamic that we need to be aware of and that we need to change. As I was saying, the threat of nuclear war does not exist in a vacuum. It's directly related to aggressive military competition, much of that being driven by the U.S. Nuclear annihilation will come from a specific war, whether by miscalculation, accident, or otherwise. If we are serious about avoiding a nuclear war, did you have a point there, Helen, about accidental war?
Well, yeah, just wanted to point out regarding miscalculation or accident. No, the Cuban Missile Crisis was averted because somebody figured out that it probably wasn't a nuclear strike. There was a false alarm over a computer simulation. Another one, which was caused by sunlight glinting off of clouds. And the Soviet satellite system thought it was launching rockets. And then you had the Norwegian science rocket was launched to study the northern lights. So these systems are not perfect. And I would like to point out that attacking Soviet early warning systems is not a good idea because it means that the Soviets might think they don't have any time to react. So this attack that the Ukrainians did on Russian soil, attacking their early warning system, is a very dangerous idea.
Indeed it is. And so I think it was the NATO conference, 75th anniversary of NATO, big confab in Washington, D.C. this week, where there were significant protests, including members of Veterans for Peace. And our VFP Peace Walk walked into town just in time for that. It was a very chilling conference because they didn't talk, they were focused very much on the war in Ukraine. There was no talk whatsoever of pursuing negotiations to end that war, but rather how to further militarize it, how to further escalate it. And it really looks like they're destined to either take NATO or individual U.S. and European nations into a direct war with Russia. That's certainly where this is heading. And that war, of course, could very quickly become a nuclear war. So if we're serious about avoiding nuclear war, we must demand that the U.S. stop sending weapons to Ukraine and Israel and instead support ceasefires and negotiations to stop the killing. And speaking of the killing, I think several 100,000 young, poor, young, working class soldiers, both from Russia and Ukraine, have already died in this war. And I think they're worth remembering. And if we can stop that slaughter, the sooner the better. We also should call for an end to the reckless U.S. confrontation with China and North Korea. It's critically important that these conflicts are ended as soon as possible and replaced with negotiations for peaceful coexistence. And in the longer run, as detailed in the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, and I recommend that you all check that out again, the U.S. must make a sea change in its foreign policy. We must stop intervening in other countries. Obviously, we in Veterans for Peace are very clear about that. We must stop playing nuclear chicken. We must demand a peaceful U.S. foreign policy that respects the sovereignty of all nations and human rights of all people. The U.S. should sign the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and reach out to the other nuclear powers to say, let's all get rid of our nuclear weapons together. Let's pursue the interests of all humanity by replacing competition with cooperation. Let's stop spending precious resources on the military and take care of our people's needs instead. Let's work together to stop global warming, the other imminent existential threat. In order to avoid nuclear annihilation and climate catastrophe too, we must abolish war once and for all. Either that or we're going to be facing what Bob Dylan warned about us, hard rain is going to fall. And I'll leave it there and invite Helen to give us some positive vibes and good news about the continuing voyage of the historic anti-nuclear sailboat Golden Rule. And she's going to give a fairly short update with a few graphics, and then
Well, for one thing, so the Golden Rule is in Eureka, our home port, Humboldt Bay, and one of the local newspaper reporters found out that we were getting ready to leave, and look at that. We got a huge front page spread with two nice pictures, and look at the size of the headline for Trump. Woo-hoo! Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. I'm going to just go to the Veterans for Peace, or the Golden Rules website, because this is where the information is that you should get if you want to know where we're going and what we're doing. So I just uploaded our most recent newsletter to the website, so you can get a lot more information there. But here's a picture of where we're going. So we're going to go all the way up the coast, and we're going to stop and have a little protest against the nuclear-armed submarines that are just 25 miles from Seattle. And then when we get to Seattle, the Navy's warships, those weapons of mass destruction, are coming in, and we're going to protest against that. Now, both of those actions will have Kai activists with us, and we'll be passing out information on shore. Then we're going to go into Lake Washington and protest against the military air show, hopefully for a couple of days, and we'll go over to Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, which borders the submarine base, the nuclear-armed submarine base. And we're going to join them there, as well as we're going to go to the Green Lake Hiroshima commemoration. So we've got a big bang start in the Seattle area. And then we're going to have events, of course, everywhere we go. So on Tuesday, August 13th, that's a really important day. We're going to take around 24 Marshallese youth out sailing in the early afternoon. And then starting at 5, we're going to have a peace party in the park with lots and lots of people in groups. Washington Against Nuclear Weapons and Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility are helping us with all of that. Then
Where's
we'll
that
go
gonna be,
down
Helen?
to Tacoma. I'm sorry,
Where's that going to
what,
be?
Jerry?
Where will that be?
Oh,
The
that's all
Marshallese
going to
gonna take that?
happen. That's in Tacoma.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. In Tacoma, not a very far away from Seattle. And then we're going to do something similar in Olympia. We'll be taking people sailing and showing them the boat. And then we're going to have a really nice peace party in the park right next to that dock too. So we have 2 of those scheduled. And then we're going to work our way up to right on the border between the United States and Canada is Peace Arch Park. And we're going to have a wonderful party in the park there, with both Canadians and US being able to get into that park and have a wonderful event with us. Then we'll go up to Vancouver, BC and have an event there right in the middle of downtown Vancouver. And in Vancouver, let's see. Yeah. That's kind of the mobilization against war and occupation. Younger people are going to be putting that together. And then we're going to go down to Port Townsend. Oh, well, before that, we're going to go to Friday Harbor on San Juan Island, where the man who sailed the Golden Rule as a kid for about 15 years is going to be our skipper again this year. So Terry Lush, his dad was the 4th owner of the Golden Rule, and he skippered us around the northern part of the Salish Sea in 2016, and he's going to do it again this year. So he's hosting us a lasagna dinner and a presentation with us. And then we're going to go to Victoria, BC, and that's where we'll be again in the Victoria Classic Boat Show. In 2016, we were there and we won a prize for the best working boat. And boy, do we work. We're also going to drive up to Cowichan and give a presentation to their peace group and their Quaker group up there. So that's a really busy time. And then we're going to come down to Port Townsend and be in the Port Townsend Wood and Boat Festival, where we were before, and we're giving a presentation that Saturday evening in one of their many venues where people talk about their boats and their adventures. Mm-hmm. And then when we're all done with that, we're going to head back south, and we're going to go in the Columbia River and stop in Vancouver, Washington, and be part of the Vancouver Peace Fair. And then we're going to go down the Willamette River to Portland and have some events there with them before we head back out the Columbia to Rainier, where the Trojan nuclear power plant used to be. And then finally, we're going to stop in Newport, Oregon on our way back south to our home port of Eureka. So we're working on the boat right now. It's there's a lot still to do. We're replacing our transmission, which was, we didn't think we'd have to do it quite yet, but we decided that would be the safest thing to do. And that is turning out to be very difficult. So wish us luck. Our new transmission was $3,000 because we got a very nice quality used one. And so we'll be using that in some future email to say, help us pay for that. So
Great,
that's kind of what we're up to.
We're also hoping to make it. We're also hoping to arrive down in San Francisco Bay mid-October in time for the Fleetweed action and the activities are being promoted by the VFP Climate Crisis and Militarism Project against these obscene military air shows. So that'll be good. And then I just wanted
That's
to
right.
mention
It's
that,
possible we'll
as I
get to
said,
do 2 military air show protests. Go ahead.
yeah. And I wanted to mention also that, as I said before, I think the anti-nuclear movement needs to become an anti-war movement, and the anti-war movement must become an anti-nuclear movement. And there's got to be a lot more cross-pollination because than already exists. And I think to a large extent that's been the impetus of the VFP Nuclear Abolition Working Group, and that we meet once a month now. We used to meet twice a month. And now we're sponsoring webinars like this one with experts greater than Helen and I, and we are also promoting now the Global Week of Action against spending on nuclear weapons. That's something that's been promoted internationally by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, and it's going to be September 16th to 22nd, and we're going to encourage all VFP chapters and members of Friends and Allies to take action that week for no money for nuclear weapons. And have anything further to add, Helen?
Oh, I think we've pretty much covered what we wanted to say today. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you, all of you, for coming.
Okay.